So, Erev Tov, welcome everybody to another virtual Temple Emanu-El event. We are glad that you are joining us for what we know will be a meaningful evening of learning with our guest, Michael Cohen, tonight. This is part of our Tikkun Olam initiative that we've been focusing on for the past year. This past Sunday, we had an event for our other initiative, Shomrei Adamah, Guardians of Earth, our environmental initiative, and our initiative focused on anti-Semitism and hate speech has been something that we've been studying and learning about this past year as well. So we are excited that the Tikkun Olam Committee has organized this event tonight. We will have the opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation. You can always raise your hands in the little square, and I will call on you and unmute you so you can participate in the conversation. So it's my honor to turn it over to Deborah Hirsch-Boyle, member of the Tikkun Olam Committee, who's organized this evening to share a few words.
Thank you, Rabbi. Before I introduce Michael, just want to reiterate, so if you would, instead of chatting your questions, just raise your hand and we will get to that at the end. And also for those who have asked, this will be recorded. It is being recorded and it will be available on the temple website tomorrow. Okay, so with that, I want to welcome Michael Cohen, who is the Eastern Director of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which, for those who don't know, is a global human rights organization using the lessons of the Holocaust to confront anti-Semitism, hate, and terrorism, training tens of thousands on prejudice, diversity, and tolerance issues, and supporting the State of Israel. Michael previously served as the New York State Director of Political and Strategic Affairs at one of the most influential lobbying firms in New York, called Pitta, Bishop, Del, Giorno, and Giblin. Mr. Cohen also served as a senior staff member to the New York State Senate leadership, senior staff member to Congressman Adolphus Towns, former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and as senior advisor to New York City Council member Matthew Eugene. Michael's also served as a campaign strategist on over 100 political campaigns and is currently serving his fourth term on the Englewood, New Jersey City Council. Michael was recognized in 2010 as one of the Capital newspaper's 40 Under 40 Rising Stars in the state government, and again in 2017 as New York Media's 40 Under 40 Rising Stars in the nonprofit sector. He's a graduate of Brooklyn College. He holds a master's in political science. So I think we're in good hands tonight. And with that, Michael, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank yourself and the rabbi and the entire committee. It's so important to continue putting together these kind of events and these kinds of talks so that at a time when information about what's going on outside of our homes and outside our communities that we're sheltered in on is so critical, it is important that that kind of information gets out and that people have a window as to what's going on in our larger communities, both in the Jewish communities and beyond. So I really, I'm happy to be here tonight, and for this opportunity for the synagogue and for everybody else that's on, and I look forward to tonight and to working together in many ways, moving forward as well. So thank you first for all that you do for the committee and to the rabbi. We look at people right now are looking at the things that we're seeing during the pandemic. They're seeing hearing talks about what's going on in terms of anti-Semitism, in terms of targeting different communities for blame for different things. One of the things that we don't realize, because right now it's hard to imagine life before the pandemic already, even though we don't realize it's only been 9 or 10 weeks. But one thing we realize, when we really take a step back to realize late January, early February, we were having, in terms of the tri-state area, we were already at a point where we were, where anti-Semitism was really bursting at the seams, unfortunately. We were at a time when you look at, we had the massive march across the Brooklyn Bridge with 30,000 people, talking about fighting against anti-Semitism and needing, intercommunal solidarity to make sure that we can fight back together. We had similar rallies in New Jersey, in Long Island. And this was all late January, early February. This wasn't 10 years ago. This wasn't 5 years ago. This is this year, this calendar year. People, so when you're talking about what's happening during the pandemic in terms of anti-Semitism, I find it so, so important, to just go into what kind of stage we were sitting coming into it. Just in December and January, what was on all of our minds at that point was the shooting in Jersey City that we all saw videos of. I remember myself actually walking there hours after, stepping on broken glass, looking at bullet holes, just hours after the fact. I remember the night, a few nights after that, when we were on a Saturday night getting the call about how a Hanukkah party was disrupted in Rockland County, when you had an individual break into a rabbi's house where they were having a Hanukkah party and start stabbing individuals. One of those individuals, actually, Joseph Newman, succumbed to his wounds only about 2-3 weeks ago. Who people realized he was still in the hospital until then. But we had a situation in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, around that same time, when you had an individual that was visibly Jewish walking down the block, and you had people come from behind him yelling all types of anti-Semitic slurs and them hitting over the head with a brick. This is, you look at also in 2019, we had a generational high. If you look at all the stats in the tri-state area of hate crimes, and I mean felony hate crimes. These are not misdemeanors that are recorded. These are felony level hate crimes. Forget all of the other discriminatory things that we see. Just in recorded hate crimes, just to give you an example, the NYPD alone, just in the 5 boroughs, had shown right there that in 2019 alone, there were 428 felony level hate crimes in New York City. 245 of those were against Jews, over 55%. So you start looking at when people say, are we talking about anti-Semitism? Is it real? Is it happening? These aren't even the statistics that are all the things that we don't see. These are just things that right away that are being recorded. These are the ones that were actually caught, that were prosecuted, that were brought into by NYPD, and that's just in New York City. And then if you think about it, if you're talking about the 245 felony level hate crimes against Jews in 2019, and that was about a 25% increase from the year prior, you start looking at those numbers and you think, well, in 2018 you were still over 200 then. I mean, you think about just how many, what kind of environment we were in immediately prior to this pandemic. So then you look at what happened during the pandemic. The pandemic hits, and obviously, all the crime stats go down precipitously because everybody sheltered in. But just because the crime stats go on and just to go down, and just because the people on the streets aren't able to do what was happening over the last year and a half, doesn't mean they've suddenly come to love everybody. The hate groups are still there. The people who are forwarding those messages are still there. And the only problem is now they're in a situation where even though we were very successfully galvanized as a Jewish community in January and February in fighting back, and it was actually starting to slow down a little bit, we were actually really making an impact. Now all of a sudden you've given the hate groups and individual folks who want to hate just a whole new breath of life. Just give a couple of examples of what we've experienced over the last couple of months, and then I'll go into what we're doing about it. But first of all, look on the international scene. As soon as COVID hits, you'd think that every country would right away be saying, wow, we have to figure out a vaccine. We have to make sure that we can work together. Well, in nations like Turkey and Iran, who their first comments was listing their priorities. We want to make it very clear that if a vaccine comes from Israel, we're not interested. That was the priority, to make sure that if a vaccine came from Israel, they're not interested. But it's really funny, actually, because when you think about it, when Baghdadi, who was the head of the BDS movement, when he went on video, he actually, I guess, took on, one of our Jewish concepts of pikuach nefesh all of a sudden, when he came out and said, regardless of how we need to destroy Israel or push the Jews into the sea, if they come up with a vaccine, we're given an exception, we can take it. So it's really funny seeing the differentials there. But overall, he didn't, he obviously made sure to reinforce that it's only a one-time exception because it helps, the people who are employing BDS as a tactic to enforce anti-Semitism. It's not because that they've suddenly had a change of heart. And these were the first messages out. These were week 1, when the messages should have been all over the place. How do we get more ventilators? How do we get more care? How do we get more beds? That wasn't even the priority, even under those circumstances. Let's take it much closer to home. Let's really take it, really into our communities, because a lot of times we hear about anti-Semitism and we hear about these things and we think it's happening over there, wherever there is. You know, it's like I make joke. Like my wife and I were at a wedding, you know, before this happened, and there was a table of giveaway desserts afterwards. You know, and she went to the car ahead of me, and they said, "Which one does your wife want?" And I said, "The other one." And she said, "What do you mean the other one?" I said, "Whichever one I pick, it's going to be the other one." You know, so just like here, I mean, all of these, you know, all of these, you know, hate groups. You know, it's just a question of, well, here's just, you know, the next thing and the next thing. It's never going to be that we solve one thing and all of a sudden the hate goes away. It's a question of, you know, there's an innate hatred there for all kinds of reasons, and it's not going away. It's a question of how does it change, and how do we deal with it, and how do we combat it all the time. So when you look at, you know, besides the fact that we saw all over the place Jewish conspiracy theories, you know, conspiracy theories about how you know, just like the Jews were responsible for the Black Plague, you know, we're responsible for this, and, you know, all those kinds of analogies and references. But let's look at very locally what happened. So one of the first things you started seeing is, which you know, the Wiesenthal Center acted upon immediately, was in Edison, New Jersey. You had a city council member. He's the vice chair of the Edison City Council. He's of Indian descent. He ended up, you know, going online and posting something that was very offensive and anti-Semitic. He had heard, you know, about, well, he wrote something about how the Lakewood Jews are responsible and things of that nature for the disease, for the virus. And right away we contacted him. And right away, part of the reactions that we had was, well, where are you basing this on? What are you saying? You know, why do you think that when you're a leader, it's not just coming from a hate group, but you're somebody people are looking up to fight hate groups. You're the vice chair of a city council of a mid-sized city in New Jersey. And right away he took it down and said, I didn't know. He happened to have been just a 30-year first-term council person. I said, what do you mean you didn't know? This is what you think of Lakewood? He says, quite honestly, I've never been to Lakewood. I said, so what makes you think that that's happening there, one way or the other? And then he said, well, I'm seeing it all over online, and I just thought I was making a joke, and it obviously, you know, I was mistaken, and it really wasn't funny, and I'm really embarrassed by it, and I'm sorry. And right away, though, what was important also was recognizing, you know, how he got from point A to point B. Even somebody who was the vice chair of a city council, who's been politically involved since he was 16 years old, because of the plethora of anti-Semitic things that he was seeing online, it wasn't that he looked at it and he checked it out and he was feared by it for spreading of a virus and decided, I have to make an astute comment. It was, oh, wow, I'm seeing all this kind of stuff online, so I'll just go with it. And that's a very big problem. Now I'll get back to him in a second because I want to, I want to talk in a few minutes about how, you know, what the result of that was. We had another situation just a few weeks ago, about 10, 12 days ago, which made a lot of press in New Jersey. An individual named Joyce Ship Friedman, who was actually the president of the Edison City Council. And we'll go into a little bit in a few minutes about, you know, the disparity of the two different actions in Edison here. And she ended up saying, you know, she had posts on her Facebook page, and she's somebody who posts regularly and is always, you can see, very active online on social media. And she ends up having posts which are anti-Chinese and anti-Semitic as well, making comparisons about trying to show how dates of the establishment of Israel led to some connection to a date about the virus, and all these different crazy things that were posted up there. And, you know, once, you know, we approached her as well, except her reaction was very different. She didn't come in like Sam Joshi and say, I'm sorry, oh my God, I need to learn from this, and I need to better myself, I need to do something different. She ended up saying, you know, no, this is just a political conspiracy against me. I never did anything like this. I was hacked. So we have relations with Facebook. We said, what's the likelihood of somebody being hacked? And they almost laughed at us saying, hacked on Facebook, really? So, you know, but after that, we then came back to her and said, because we're trying to be thorough, we're not trying to make accusations that are false or that are misleading. So we said, well, let's look at the dates that we just caught it, because unfortunately there was a lag in terms of when the communities caught what her posts are to when those things were allegedly hacked on her Facebook page. There was 28 days in between when they went on her Facebook page and when she was quote unquote caught. So we also wanted to see, well, did she have any likes? Is there any proof that people went on there and liked those posts and actually knew about it? She had likes. She had a number of likes on that page. The question also was, did she post anything afterwards? She posts, multiple things every day. And there were other posts pre and post, which would indicate the kind of belief system which would make one believe that she's very capable, of posting the things that were on that day. So then her next reaction was, well, this is all about a political conspiracy about them trying to get me. So I said, well, who's them? Who's trying to get you? So then she went into different press mediums, and in one article she said, well, I'm a woman, so they're coming after me because I'm a woman. It's the men. Then in another post, or another news article, she's African American, so she said it must be because they can't stand African Americans in power. In the next post, it was because she's saying that she's technically a senior citizen, so it must be because they're going after me because I'm a senior. So within the span of a day in the press, she claimed it was men, those fighting African Americans in power, those fighting her age, and every single other possible thing you can find. And we kept on saying to her, and not just us, but others as well, the only thing you need to say is you don't believe that this stuff is true, regardless of how it got there. I'm the president of the city council of a governing body of a mid-sized city. This is atrocious. It's horrible. However it got there, whatever anything I've had to do with it, I'm sorry. It's gone, and we need to do better, and we need to figure out a way to work together. That's all she had to say. That's all she had to say. But to this day, she still has not apologized. She still has said nothing in regards to that being something which she doesn't share. Even after a city council meeting last week, when she was there and had the opportunities and people called her out, she still said nothing of the sort, only leading us more to believe, not to believe, but to understand who we're dealing with here, and that these hacking quotes or these other things, well, there are more defense mechanisms, because the reality is the very, very high likelihood is she is responsible directly for what was up there. She was actually then criticized by her local state assembly people, her local state senators. The New Jersey South Asian Caucus came after her on this. Her own colleagues, came after her on this. So, at a certain, but this, even with all of that, so I'll say this also: when you have all those people who supposedly know her on a much better personal scale than we know her, and they're still saying this and willing to come out on her against this, obviously there's something there. Like I said, to this day, she still hasn't said anything in terms of any kinds of apology. So then, just to go a little further south, in New Jersey to see what's going on. If you go actually into the Ocean County area, whether it's Lakewood, Toms River, Jackson, and the area there, you had a few things going on. So first of all, you had a council president in Jackson, I think about 3 weeks ago, who suddenly was saying about the virus in Jackson. Now, he wanted to make very clearly sure that he wasn't saying anything about against Jews, because he didn't want to be accused afterwards of being an anti-Semite. If you listen to his speech, which is now on YouTube or online, or wherever you can, it can be found very easily. His entire speech circles around saying, well, we need to protect against those people in certain religions who act in certain ways, who are insular, who are, he every possible thing he said was so obvious where he was going. Let's just, and this is at a public city council meeting. Everybody on there recognized right away what he was saying. Just because you don't actually say the word Jew, but you describe every single possible way to ridicule a people who are in your community, who live here, who do this, who do that, who look like this. I like to think we're not a bunch of idiots. We know what you're saying. Well, let's just say with the pressure put on, or as he claims, without any pressure put on, at last week's Jackson City Council meeting, he suddenly resigned for health reasons. You know what? Good riddance. Whatever our understanding is, this individual also worked for the federal government, I believe for the USDA, and who knows what kind of pressures he was getting from there. You know what? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. He's gone. We can move on from him. But the reality is though, even playing around with words like that, like I said, we watch these things. We know these things are happening, and we're not going to sit quietly by while those kind of things happen. But don't worry. There's a hate group in Ocean County. Some of you might have heard about it, called Rise Up Ocean County. So they started about a year and a half ago, about last November, December, starting to come out against the Jewish communities and trying to initially try to use language about how they just don't want development, they don't want traffic, but so initially they were trying to toe that line as far as how they can say they're not anti-Semitic, they're just anti-development, or they're not anti-Semitic, they're just anti, all these other possible kinds of things. So they put together videos and whatnot. They said, we're gonna put together a movie. We're gonna call it OC 2030. OC 2030 stands for Ocean County 2030. And it was supposed to be a movie that they were gonna put of a decent length to demonstrate, as they said in their lead up to it, if we don't do anything about these kinds of people coming into our community, what Ocean County is going to look like in 2030. Of course, not anti-Semitic at all, except for the fact that they decided they were going to start playing some trailers, which some of them might even still be on YouTube. I don't even think some of them are taken down. So one of them, they ended up, first of all, having the famous Pastor Martin Niemöller poem, which we all are familiar with, the one that starts of how first they came after the trade unionists and nobody came and nobody fought for me, etc. So they used that and decided to make a parody of a poem that we all find sacred in our tellings of the Holocaust. And their video went on to say something like, well, first they came knocking on my door, and and tried to buy my house, but I didn't think it was a problem, so I allowed it, so I didn't do anything. And then they came after my trees, and I didn't think that the trees were important to me, so I didn't do anything. Then they came after my school board, and I didn't vote, so I didn't have anything. And then they came after my, and now because I did nothing, there's nobody there protecting me from these people. But you're talking about making a parody of one of the most sacred Holocaust poems we know, but they're not anti-Semitic. Then they came out with the second one. The second one, you actually see somebody with a video camera going into, they claim it was in Lakewood, but there's no way to know for sure. And we've seen fake videos before. But the leader of this group took a video camera and started through a chain link fence at whatever yeshiva he was at, started taking video of elementary school kids who were visibly Jewish, and showing their numbers and showing how they were immediately coming up to him. And, they're coming up to him a little while, because when you have, I have young kids myself, if you have, a 10, 11-year-old seeing somebody with a camera, they're like, oh, a point of interest, what's this? And he's videoing these kids. And he's taking videos of them and saying, as he's showing them on this trailer, look how many of them there are. Look how many of them are expanding. And then on the screen, as he's talking like this, it's giving the numbers, saying how, Ocean County's welfare population, was this, 10 years ago, and now it's this. And with the continued growth in towns like Lakewood, this is what it's going to be in 10 years from now. And Medicaid fraud was here. Well, with the growth in Lakewood, this is what it's going to be, and et cetera, while pointing a video at Jews and basically saying that every problem that's going to happen in the entire county of Ocean over the next 10, 15, 20 years is going to be because there are Jews here. That group, we were successful in knocking off of Facebook, because Facebook was really their biggest platform. They had, believe it or not, in residents of Jackson, Toms River, and the surrounding areas, they were knocking on the door of 20,000 followers. 20,000 people watching this. And if you saw the posts, one was more anti-Semitic than the other. The reactions, the posts were constant. How do we get rid of these Jews? How do we talk about these Jews? These Jews are all this. These Jews are all that. Constant viral vitriol against Jews. So we knocked them off. They ended up, all of a sudden, as the pandemic started, you saw Rise of Ocean County 2.0. Suddenly, all of a sudden, after they were knocked off in a few months prior, suddenly with the pandemic, they reappear. They reappear, with more vitriol about how, well, the Jews are responsible for the pandemic. The Jews are the ones spreading the virus. But now it's like they have new life. they've been responsible now for taking it a step further. A few weeks ago, there was a picture of a video. They actually went out and videoed a school bus. They're literally following Jews around, waiting for something to happen so they could take pictures and put them up. And you see it because you see all the different things that they're doing. These are online. These aren't things that I'm just saying. These are things that you can follow their sites when they're up, and they're right there for anybody to see. They followed a school bus that had Hebrew letters on it, so it's obviously from the yeshiva. They right away called the local reporter and whatnot. They actually got an article printed saying and showing how, look, the Jews are still, this is like 3 weeks into the pandemic. The Jews aren't complying. The Jews are spreading the virus. The yeshivas are still open. Look at the buses. They're still all around our town, right? They ended up having they called law enforcement also. Thank God they did. Law enforcement ended up going on there, taking pictures inside the bus once they boarded the bus, and saw that what had happened was one of the not-for-profits in the area, I forgot which one, I forgot the name of the one, but one of the not-for-profits ended up speaking to one or two of the yeshivas and saying, we want to be able to better distribute care packages to homebound people during the pandemic. We don't have the vehicles. Can we clean your vehicles, disinfect them, and borrow them? So when the police came on, what they saw a driver with one or two people helping him, one in the middle of the bus and one on the total end of the bus, with the bus filled with care packages. This is what they're saying. When we talk about misinformation being out there, the reporter had actually already reported on this, and afterwards subsequently was left, basically having to apologize publicly for this. But the fact is here you have a group who's literally following Jews around looking for something. We had another situation with that same group, with one of the overnight carrier services. I don't want to mention which one because they were very good at handling it, so we don't want to, but one of the ones like a FedExpress, UPS, one of those kind, where 2 weeks ago, they ended up all over this Rise Up Ocean County's site, and I'll explain to you a little bit of the differences of their sites, how it's changed based on what we've done with them over the last couple of weeks. But right away showing that a video of this Jewish family in, I believe it was in either Jackson or Toms River, getting a delivery of big boxes. And all of a sudden, the prosecutors were right there, came up right after the delivery, and ended up asking, what's in the boxes with the masks and this and that. Now the boxes had already been put back were put into the house, into the garage, just in between when the prosecutors had come and when the delivery happened. So nobody was actually able to see what the boxes were. But the prosecutors came right up and said, we were called and said that you were getting delivery of masks and of the masks from PPE, and that we know that there are and that we've been told from other stories about how all these stories about Jews hoarding PPE, because obviously that's the next thing that we're hearing. So the prosecutor said, from what we were told, from what you have to register this PPE, and it has to register with us, and it has to go to whatever other places are on a list, so we can go to other places of need to first responders. The family basically told the prosecutors, you're wrong. I don't need to register anything. There are different masks. There's K95s and N95s. There are different levels of masks. One of those needs to be registered because they go to first responders, and we would never touch those. We have the other ones, which are meant to be sold individually to different places and different people, so people on the street can be safe. So we're selling those, and those do not have a state requirement to register. They're not supposed to go to first responders because they're not good enough for first responders. And I'm not really sure how you got to this place in the first place. Bottom line is, we knew that Rise Up Ocean County, has, some people who work for one of those overnight carriers. And we asked in the video, in the posting that they actually had on Rise Up Ocean County, the list, the packing label. So if it went straight from UPS or FedEx or one of those carriers, and it went there into the person's home, into the person's garage, how would Rise Up Ocean County have the packing slip if somebody inside from the inside wasn't giving it to them? And also, how would they know about the delivery in advance to have their people outside the person's home upon the delivery to make sure they were there to video the whole thing, and then call the prosecutors to go and give them false information or at least incomplete information to go then and try to go after these guys? So that carrier service actually went, did a full internal investigation and dealt with it very well. So like I said, and they've been doing a very good job on these issues. So, we don't want to mention who they are because, they prefer to keep it quiet, but they've been doing a very good job. But it just shows you the depth of which these hate groups will go. So what do we do with Rise Up Ocean County? Also, Rise Up Ocean County, we've knocked off Rise Up Ocean County 2.0. They then had Jackson Strong, which was another site that they were allowed to piggyback on. We knocked Jackson Strong off. Now Rise Up Ocean County came up again, and another iteration, we knocked them off again. So we're now going in like 2-week cycles where they come on, we knock them off, they go on, we knock them off, and Facebook is very well aware of them and doesn't want them anywhere near them. We've actually had, over the last few months, actually right before the pandemic, Governor Murphy and the state attorney general have both publicly condemned this group as a hate group as well. So it's not just one entity saying so. I mean, for a governor and attorney general to say that, obviously, you see the difference in merit there. But also, you want to move up a little north to Rockland County. We've seen a lot of things up there. They actually have, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but we had situations about 1.5 years ago in Mahwah, New Jersey, where they were having city council meetings, which were packed to the gills. And if you've ever been to a local city council meeting, normally you get 10, 15 people there if you're lucky. We were going to city council meetings with literally 400 or 500 people there every single meeting because they wanted to make sure to pass resolutions against the Jewish community. They actually, I know this sounds crazy, but they were actually passing resolutions which were blocking the Jewish community from going to their public playgrounds and parks and whatnot, doing it creatively. But in the end, you actually had the state attorney general file one of the largest, if not the largest, lawsuit against another municipality for anti-Semitic acts. So obviously, and they ended up with a settlement where that town agreed to actually have a few $100,000 in escrow to protect against ever having anti-Semitic resolutions again. So the reason I'm telling you about Mahwah, though, is we were seeing the people that were in Mahwah, which is right on the border of Rockland County, who were on the hate group starting that whole episode 1.5 years, 2 years ago, were actually starting to communicate on the posts with the hate groups in Ocean County to show the connectivity and saying, hey, this is how the Jews get you here, watch out for that. So we're seeing the networks of the hate groups as well. That's the scary, that's really scary. So in Rockland County, since the pandemic, with that as an overlay coming into it, you've seen all of a sudden on a certain group such as Clarkstown Uncensored, Clarkstown What They Don't Want You to Know, and some other sites where you've seen postings that have recently over the last couple of weeks said, oh my God, we need a call to arms against the Jewish community when this is over. You are literally, and other people posting about how positive that sounds. They're literally talking about physical violence against the Jewish community that just had that stabbing incident not 4 months ago. Part of what we have to know is when they say they're going to come after us, believe them. It's in Rockland County also, you saw some of the elected officials there when you would have different hotspots in terms of the virus. So all of a sudden you started having people saying, from an elected official perspective, oh, we need to figure out our quarantines. We need to figure out about how to isolate those people, right? But then, even following on that language, which was careful, on the Facebook pages of some of these hate groups, it's, yes, we need to put those Jews in cattle cars. Yes, we need to put them in ghettos. I mean, this isn't about protecting against the virus and saying, like, you don't have somebody there saying, I'm a concerned parent, I don't want to blame any particular community, but anybody who is violating social distancing needs to be dealt with accordingly. That's not what was said. What was said was, we need a call to arms against the Jewish community, and if they're not complying, put them in cattle cars. I mean, there's a very big difference between the two kinds of postings and what you're seeing there. So you're seeing also, over the last 10 days or so, I testified this morning to the New York City Council Committee on Finance on these issues this morning, where just in New York City over the last 10 days, 12 days, you had an incident where a couple from Queens, random, no record, drives up, into Brooklyn, somewhere on Bedford Avenue, I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken, sees a visibly Jewish people in the area, and ends up getting out of their car, going up to women, children, ripping off the masks that they were wearing, taking pictures of them, and then saying, look, you're not complying. We're going to post this. You Jews, you're spreading all this virus. We're not going to do, and things of that nature. I mean, talking about a couple that obviously got radicalized somewhere along the line that literally came from Queens to a Jewish neighborhood to do this. I mean, this is happening, you know, not in the Midwest, not in somewhere. This is happening in Brooklyn 10 days ago, 12 days ago. You know, you also, you know, the Asian communities, you know, seeing a lot of this also. You know, you've had, you know, the largest hate crime increase that we've seen based on all law enforcement stats over the last couple of weeks of the pandemic has actually been against the Asian community. And you've seen, you know, New York City's already made, I believe it was, as of last week, 5 arrests for violent felony hate crimes against Asians for being blamed in hate crimes for spreading the virus as well. You know, so unfortunately, you know, other populations are experiencing, you know, some of what we're experiencing also. And from the Wiesenthal Center perspective, we're trying to make sure to show solidarity with them and partnership with them and work with them. So just to give you a little bit now about, you know, what's being done about all this. So it's not all about the negative, but we see the positive and how this works. Because one of the things that everybody always wants to know is, well, what are we doing? What are we doing to stop all this? How can we stop all this? How can we influence it? So let me tell you, the situation with Sam Joshi, the first individual we mentioned, the vice chairman of the Edison City Council. So he ends up, after that incident that night, so we end up talking to him and he says, well, what else can I do? How else can I say I'm sorry to Lakewood? So we end up getting Rabbi Aaron Cutler, who's one of the recognized heads of the Lakewood Jewish community. We get him on the phone with Sam Joshi that night. And he says right away to Sam Joshi, I have an idea. I'm not looking to convince you of anything just by words. Why don't you be my guest, and tomorrow you and Michael in separate cars in a car caravan, so nobody's coming anywhere near each other, come down and I'll drive you through Lakewood and you can see what's going on for yourself. The next morning, 10 o'clock the next morning, and it's about an hour from Edison to Lakewood, that councilman actually got in the car and we met, you know, down in front of Rabbi Aaron Cutler's house and started driving around. And part of what we saw, you know, was there had been incidents that we've been hearing about in the first couple of days of the pandemic that, you know, some religious institutions that if people wanted to, that people didn't understand the full gamut of what was going on, or when they said the synagogue was closed, what that means, or if they knew the code to the back door, they'd sneak in, you know, in really the first week of the pandemic. So Rabbi Cutler showed Sam Joshi how on BMG, which is the biggest yeshiva in the Northeast, the biggest yeshiva outside of Israel in the world, which is the one that Rabbi Cutler heads, that he showed all the doors were chain locked with chains and padlocks on top of the regular locks. And Sam Joshi said, what's that? And he said, because we want to make extra careful sure that just in case people don't fully understand, there is no possible way that anybody, even with a key or a code, can ever get in until it's safe. And we went to some of the storefronts. And he saw what people were doing you know, how all the stores were closed, how all the parking lots were empty, how the streets were empty, how even in the places where people were, they were doing the right thing at that point. And afterwards, you know, Sam Joshi said, well, what can I do? We said, simply, when you go back home today, go on the same Facebook page, go on the same social media, and just report what you honestly saw. And he did. And he wrote a big apology saying, I can't believe I toured Lakewood today, and this is what I saw. And he had pictures of the chain link, of the chains along those locks, of the stores empty. So he wasn't just saying so, but he was showing pictures of what he actually experienced and said, you know what, I was wrong. Hate is wrong. I should have known better, and I'm going to be an advocate against hate. So you know what happened? When his council president, Joyce Ship Friedman, that we talked about with the posts that were hacked, when she had her incident 2 weeks ago, the first person publicly, as a public elected official, to call her out on it was her political ally, Sam Joshi. Came after her right away saying, you know what, you're my political ally. Politically, you know, we need each other, but you know what? There are certain things that are more important and bigger than that. And anti-Semitism and hate has no place here. Just today, I ended up doing the final proofreads with him when he designed, which is going to be introduced in the Edison City Council next Wednesday at their meeting, him helping draft with the usages of the Wiesenthal Center, the Highland Park prior resolution, and a resolution that was done in San Antonio, putting together an Edison resolution sponsored by him against hate specifically to the Jewish and Asian communities through the pandemic, talking about all the things that we've been talking about here. He's actually not just saying, I'm sorry, but by handling it in a way that it wasn't just, let's go curse him out and scream at him and call him out. Let's first find out what is behind it. In a person like Joyce Ship Freeman, it's obviously that there's hate behind it. In a person like Sam Joshi, this is an individual who can be a leader in the Central Jersey community for 20, 30 years. He's only 30 years old. And he never meant to hate. He was 29, 30 years old and doing something stupid on social media. So he actually also in the Bergen Record co-authored an editorial with the Wiesenthal Center about 2 weeks ago talking about how we need to fight back against hate. So we've turned to, and he's also reached back out to Rabbi Cutler saying, after the pandemic, I want to come back down and see what the community is like when it's in full effect, so we can continue building relationships and understanding each other better. Because me from the Indian community and you from the Jewish community, the way we're going to work together better and stop hate is by understanding each other's narratives better as well. Then you have a situation, like I said, like Rise of Ocean County, where when we've been telling everybody, when it happens is when we have regular conversations with Facebook, with Twitter, with Instagram, they look to us to be able to give them the information about these groups. Because one of the things you'd ask, the first question people ask oftentimes is, well, why can't law enforcement find this? Why can't law enforcement do this if it's crossing the line between hate speech and free speech, right? Answer is simple. In all our conversations then with PD, the police departments, they tell us the same thing. They're not legally, without a warrant or without cause, able to just sit there and surf social media sites. They can't look for these things. They're not allowed to. If we gather it and have things that are dangerous or that require their attention and hand it over to them, then they're allowed to look at those things and do whatever is appropriate in that regard. So it's critical that organizations like the Wiesenthal Center, first of all, accumulate this information to give over to PD, but it's also even more critical for folks like who are on this video now, that when you see something, bring it to our attention, give it to us. The more eyes and ears, the better. Because also what we do is, if it doesn't cross the lines into criminality, let's say Facebook has a team which we work with and speak to probably every other day that is willing to take these things off because we've helped them work on their self-policing policy. So for instance, when you go onto these social media sites and you see all that language to sign on and then you hit I agree, we're helping redefine what's in that stuff that none of us ever reads, to specifically say, for their own self-policing, anti-Semitism, hate speech of this sort will not be tolerated, will be kicked off that site immediately. So now, if we find something bad enough, sometimes we have it off from Facebook in under a half an hour. In terms of Rise of Ocean County and other groups, we've helped them familiarize themselves with who these hate groups are so that they know who to look for. And that's why we've seen Rise of Ocean County get knocked off so many times. I mean, I actually, it was funny, I took great pride in Rise of Ocean County started coming after me because we've knocked them off so many times. The fact that we've been so successful in knocking them off probably, I think, 3 times in different iterations since the pandemic began, it means in each and every time they're having less and less followers. Because, the average person is not following them through 3 or 4 different jumps. The other thing is, when you look at who these hate groups are and who they're trying to attract and what we can do. What you're seeing right now in the pandemic is the hate groups are always going to be there. The people who always hate are going to be there. The problem is when you have a situation like a pandemic and you have a mainstream community that somebody who's lost a loved one, somebody who's lost their job, somebody who's in desperate times in some way, shape, or form, and they're looking for somebody to blame, or they're looking for some way to justify it or understand whatever the negativity in their life, unfortunately, they're going through during these tough times. If all they're hearing is these groups pounding away at anti-Semitism, it's the Jews. Look at the history. Look at the school bus. Look at what people are posting. That's all they hear. You're going to win some converts. It's not for us. It's not a question of worrying about those few people who hate. I mean, it's not even a question of understanding that the person who, is running Rise of Ocean County has a criminal record that, you can look into publicly also. Not exactly the best of company. But what we're worried about is about all those mainstream individuals that are not the people who hate, but that might be susceptible under these circumstances to listening and being indoctrinated into that hate. So what do? We're constantly doing things like we are tonight. We're constantly writing editorials. We're constantly also speaking to elected leaders and making sure they understand that people like Sam Joshi or his counterpart, Chip Friedman, are being listened to by the general population, and they need to be speaking out against hate themselves. They need to be calling these things out. And we're in constant conversations with our elected officials. That's why, like I said this earlier today, I was speaking to the New York City Council in a Zoom hearing. We need leadership to be speaking out. Leadership who has these platforms. With Rise Up Ocean County, one of the things we did last year, I actually drafted up for Wiesenthal a resolution which condemned them straight out, and we got it passed by the freeholder board of Ocean County. So imagine this: if you're sitting in one of those towns, and here you have the freeholders of Ocean County condemning Rise Up Ocean County, who claims to be for them, then who are you going to listen to? You're going to listen to all of your elected officials, and you're going to listen to these people on Facebook. But if you didn't take the steps of speaking to the members of the freeholder board, writing resolutions, getting things passed, getting it out there, working on the media to get it out there, that mainstream here's a very different message. We had to build the credibility towards that. We had to build the credibility in getting the freeholders to see that and do that, getting the governor to call them out, getting the attorney general to call them out, seeing the faces like that that are willing to say it alongside us to give us that kind of, give those situations to the mainstream that kind of credibility. And we're doing that all over the place. We're doing that in all these. That's why we're speaking constantly to elected officials throughout America and throughout the Northeast and throughout New Jersey and New York. But also, giving another example, we're also trying to change the narrative to make sure that we have positive messages out there on social media. So, for instance, last week I went with the Jewish Federation of Rockland County and the Jewish Community Relations Council of Rockland County, and with one of the police chaplains, and we ended up on the holiday of Lag BaOmer. We ended up giving and delivering meals and baked goods to every police precinct in Rockland County, to be able to show, you know what, thank you for the work you're doing in protecting all of us. Just thank you. Let that be the story. And you know what, in 2 or 3 media outlets over the last week, that was a story. You know what, let that be the story, and let that be what goes viral instead of the anti-Semitic stuff that you see out there or the blame stuff that goes out there. You know, and then also, if you're seeing that as a mainstream person, and you're saying, wow, well, the Jewish community is doing this, the Jewish community is doing that, maybe there's something I need to think twice about here. But that's why we need to create those positive narratives. And the one other thing that, you know, miraculously we're able in this environment we're still putting through is 5 years ago, I started a Wiesenthal, what we called the Government Advocacy Internship Program, to bring college-age students into understanding the practical applications of how do you actually make an impact in activism and advocacy on behalf of the Jewish community. You know, not to convince them to fight against anti-Semitism or to support Israel. If we don't know that by now, we're in other trouble. But to actually teach them how to use the media, how to use social media, how to use fundraising, how to use philanthropy, how to use building intergroup relationships and alliances, how to use grassroots building, how do you do the actual practical applications. And this coming year, we actually had more applications than we've ever had before. And during the pandemic, people are calling us and doubling down and saying, we need to do something here. The feeling to have an impact. And you know, we need to have that next generation taking that lead, really making sure that they're involved and learning how to do this and have an impact. And we don't know how much of it this year is going to be virtual versus physical, but we've already got a full category of students for this year's cohort, and they're insisting on trucking along, and you know, we're right there with them because we have to show them that, you know what, the anti-Semites aren't stopping during the pandemic, and neither can we. So, you know, with that, I know we wanted to do some questions and answers, and I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for that. So I'm happy to, you know, unfortunately, the amount of material and content you have for these kind of things, you know, can stretch on for as long as you wanted it to, because there's that much to fight back on. But I want to make sure to, make sure you have time and open up for questions.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael, for also zooming in. A lot of the times we talk about anti-Semitism on a larger scale, but I think that helping us see what's happening in New Jersey is really beneficial to our community. And sometimes we read it, but we don't always know the ins and outs of the things that you shared with us tonight. So I appreciate your insight and your work that you have done with the Wiesenthal Center to really combat hate in our state. So we're going to open it up to questions. The questions are, you can raise your hand on the little square. The reaction, I think, is how you do it. Jackie, is there another way to do that? So we have a first question, and I'm going to allow you to talk. Susan Cohen, you're unmuted.
Yeah, what's the support you have in Trenton?
So one of the, thank you for your question. And thank you for prioritizing somebody with a Cohen last name.
I know, there you go. Related?
Well, I will I'll answer your question in 1 second, but just to tell you, it got a little weird for me. I was speaking in front of, I forgot the name of the synagogue last week or the week before, and the rabbi, was Rabbi Martin Cohen. My father's Martin Cohen, and the person who put the situation together was Sandra Cohen, who was my mother's name. Like every single part, it's just really. But anyway, but to answer your question, so we've had a lot of support in Trenton, and I'll give you a couple of very quick examples. One of the things that we did about a year and a half ago, you probably heard about what happened in Rutgers University about a year and a half ago when the Professor Shekindis, I believe his name was, started putting out anti-Semitic posts blaming the Jews for the Armenian genocide, for 9/11, and all kinds of other things. When you're talking about Rutgers having one of the largest Jewish populations out of any campus, and it actually now has, as of a year ago, built the largest Hillel, the physical Hillel, in the country, as far as I'm aware. And here's a professor teaching, one of the largest Jewish student bodies on any public campus, saying these kind of things and having them in his class. So we right away realized that, being a public university, they're funded by the state. So we have one of the things that the Wiesenthal Center has is we've built a number of different mobile exhibits. One of them was one on Israel and showing the history of the showing the 3,500-year history between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. It was a 28-panel exhibit, which when we're all back in normalcy, I'm happy to bring for us to bring to your synagogue and show that as well. There, it's gone around the world. It's the unique thing about that exhibit is we did it in conjunction with UNESCO, which we're a part of. Now, first of all, the first thing you normally hear of, is UNESCO. UNESCO did something positive for Israel, really? Well, in this case, there's a long story to it, but we actually were able to get UNESCO to co-sponsor with us. So when it goes into college campuses or goes into state capitals, it's not a Jewish organization doing this, it's UNESCO. So who can say that that's not kosher, so to speak? So we put that, we did a grand opening and ribbon cutting we staged at the Rutgers Hillel of that exhibit with the Rutgers, with the Hillel president, sorry, the Hillel executive director, I'm sorry. And we made sure to invite all the local elected officials that were senior from the state who fund them for the grand opening to speak. And then we were able to tell the president of the school through the Hillel executive director, well, to this thing, you do realize that the Senate Majority Leader in Loretta Weinberg is going to be there. You do realize that at that point, the chair of the Finance Committee, Gary Scher, who's now he's a different committee, but at that point he was head of the Budget Committee of the Assembly. He's going to be here. Gordon Johnson, who is the Deputy Majority Leader of the State Assembly, he was going to be there, and so on and so forth. And we got 20 elected officials there from the Assembly and Senate, and a lot of them with very significant positions on committees regarding the budget. And we invited the president. And then in front of the president, they basically all were saying how important it was to make sure that we support Israel and we support the Jewish community and fight anti-Semitism, because of course we understand that the president of the college would never want to continue having people like Professor Shekindis' comments on his campus, and we are so sure that he's going to do something about it because we know he shares that sentiment with us. Obviously, the president turned blue, but the implication was made. Here, the people who are funding him, let's just say Professor Shekindis was very quickly then put on a tour on a track to take away his tenure and deal with him accordingly. So we're constantly working with folks in Trenton, and that's just one example of how we work with them. But we understand, for myself, one of the things that Wiesenthal does have a very good understanding of is how to interplay the political world with doing these kind of things. I myself was a professional in the New York State Senate for about a decade, and I worked for the Congressional Black Caucus before. So I've worked in the federal level and the state levels, and I'm, as was said, earlier today, it's, I'm a fourth-term member of a city council in my own town, so we understand how politics works. We understand how to push those levers, and we'll do what we have to do to protect the Jewish community. And they've been good partners with us.
Katie Engel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So I wanted to just touch a bit on what you said about the Jewish population in Lakewood. I recently, just now I'm graduating with my MSW, and I'm in a class this was like last month or so, with other MSW students who were kind of saying negative things about the Lakewood Jews. And I'm like, wow, we're MSW students, this is bad. So I had to come up with some logical reasons for them to kind of understand, number one, I'm the only Jew in the class. And number two, I found recently, like people that don't know about Judaism really tend to, like you said, jump to the worst conclusion and kind of go with the flow with what they hear in the media. So I had to explain to them that they're not like trying to do anything bad or trying to be like selfish. I had to explain that for certain types of Jews, especially more conservative Jews, their religion and their faith is so important to them that it supersedes that of local legislature. So they're like, oh, they're spreading corona, they're not doing this, they're not social distancing. And I had to kind of like teach them another way to look at things surrounding that issue. And you speaking about how you have to, constantly go out and like battle against this anti-Semitism. I think it's true, and I applaud you for what you're doing, because it seems to be you cut off one head and another one just grows right back. And these are like educated people that are saying this. I also grew up in Ocean County, so I know that perspective too, and it's frightening.
So thank you for that, and I'll tell you a few things. So first of all, one of the things that we had to deal with was, there's no community, I don't care what demographic, what religion, what race, that throughout a pandemic or throughout anything can say there's 100% compliance. Nobody has that. There's always going to be, somebody doing something rogue. There's always going to be, somewhere that. The problem was when you had all these hate groups who were constantly following Jews and trying to take pictures, so that every single time you had a non-compliance issue, that was what went viral. It's only because there weren't people like that who were following other communities. Now, I'll tell you, for instance, in my own city of Englewood, and the neighboring Teaneck and some other towns, we had to literally take down basketball hoops to make sure people weren't playing because of non-compliance. It wasn't, and it wasn't in the Jewish communities. We hear stories like that all the time. We actually were able to get Governor Murphy, and this was probably in week 3 or week 4, made a statement when all these videos were coming out about Jews non-complying and all that first wave of the really anti-Semitic stuff coming out on the pandemic. And he had said, and my numbers here are not going to be accurate because I don't recall the exact numbers, but I'll use filler numbers for example's sake. But he said something to the effect of, over the last 48 hours, we've given 50 summonses for non-compliance in the state of New Jersey. 3 were in Lakewood. Now, the reality is what that was to say is 47 out of 50 were not. That yes, you had a couple of people who were, doing what they shouldn't have been doing, but it wasn't just them. This is what's happening, throughout the country. You've had certain people, and it was funny because it was juxtaposed at that point about, I remember there was CNN that night that there was some pastor, I forgot in which state, somewhere in the Midwest, that was continuing with an 1,800 person on a field, religious services. I mean, and here we're talking about, literally a couple of Jews on a lawn who were, it's just, it's a question. That's what I'm saying about the messaging and having the positive messaging. Like I said, when they say about Lakewood, are you going to say that there's 100% compliance? No place has 100%. But the problem is also about how you spin it. So, in certain cases, like I'll give you an example, well, we had to recognize and speak to the leadership of Lakewood also constantly and say, we know there's a double standard there. We know that you're not doing the wrong thing in certain places that you're being accused of, but even going to a certain length of what you're allowed to do, please don't, because they're going to use it even if you're right. And making the argument of that you're right is going to be the second or third story, not the first one. And what I mean by that is, so for instance, when you had abilities, I remember there was a situation where maybe it was a birthday or a bar mitzvah or what, something of that nature, where they wanted to do like one of those things where they have, on a big lawn, the 5 or 6 or 7 people waving signs and saying happy birthday or whatever the situation was in a socially distance compliant way, because they had seen another community be celebrated for it on the news the day before. And, they ended up doing it. And they got blasted. Look, they're all on a lawn. They're not social distancing. Look how they're not complying. They're like, we just copied what you celebrated on the news last night. But that's the problem. We are dealing with double standard. And we have to be very careful of what we're listening to and what we're hearing, and make sure that those stories are accurate.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions, Ed Israel? Yeah, Ed, you're unmuted. I'll come back to you, Ed, if you want. You have Gary Kay. You're unmuted, Gary.
Are we good now?
Yep.
Okay. Your reaction to Mayor de Blasio's reaction to Williamsburg?
Sure.
Just for everyone to know, it's about a funeral. So, Michael, can you just give us a little bit more of a
Sure.
Thank you.
So just to contextualize, this was about this was last week. So there was the broad stroke, and I'll give you the details, which are very important in this case. But the broad stroke of it was that there was a video. It was video that there was a funeral with hundreds of people in a procession in Williamsburg. With law enforcement trying to deal with it, and de Blasio came out with a statement that evening, which he put on Twitter, I believe, which singled out the Jewish community, saying the Jewish community and all other communities for violating, but it specifically said the Jewish community, for which he took a lot of heat for singling out any community, especially when we're talking about understanding anti-Semitism and dealing with it. So that's to contextualize in general what occurred. So, the Wiesenthal Center also called him out on that. I will say, so I'll say a few things about this because I think this does require a little bit of depth. Part of what everybody was upset about was what we had heard internally, and what came out, the next morning, was what actually really occurred was there was a synagogue who had one of their leaders, I forgot the name of the individual, but a very prominent rabbi passed away. And they had said they wanted to do something very small with their synagogue with social distance and masks and everything else, and they actually reached out to law enforcement, to the local precinct or whatever law enforcement they reached out to at NYPD, and asked them, if they can do it and how to do it. And they were working and coordinated with local law enforcement. And then they went out and did it. And then once they got out there, people seeing it all over the place started just coming from every door and joining. And it got to a point where it got, as the video saw, it got to a point that was really unsafe and really not good. The mayor at that point, came from Gracie Mansion down, came down to the site, was on site. The pictures show he was on there with some of his commissioners as well. And then he made the comment on Twitter. So part of what the criticism was later on, and what made him also go into an apology the next day, was saying that, well, the reality is the synagogue didn't just go rogue like CNN and everybody else reported that it was. They were working in coordination with law enforcement. They also had some of the local Jewish security volunteer organizations helping out in coordination also with law enforcement. So now anybody looking at this objectively would say, why would law enforcement or anybody else ever give a green light to this when it's, it's not rocket science to see that it would turn into pandemonium. But to say that the Jewish community went rogue and just went and did it, it's just not factually accurate. I will say, I've personally known Bill de Blasio for I don't know, 15 years, 18 years. When he came back the next day and said, very passionately that he's always worked on behalf of the Jewish community. He's always had a very, and that his relationship with the Jewish community has always been wonderful. You do realize this was a guy who was, before he was mayor, he was public advocate. Before he was public advocate, he was a city council person who actually represented half of Borough Park and got reelected 3 times. This is somebody who I've sat in more than once in my life in shawarma shops and on Coney Island Avenue with him talking about how we can do better for the Jewish community. So I do believe that the sincerity that he gave in terms of how much he cares about the Jewish community and how much attention he has given to the Jewish community throughout his career, is sincere. And I'll tell you firsthand, I know it's real. Do I think he made a spectacular blunder that night? Yes. Do I think he needed to apologize and that maybe his apology could have been stronger? Yes. But we all make mistakes. I want to see what he does next and what he does next and what he does next. But the comment was obviously in very bad form and really could have negative repercussions. But he is somebody who, when he says he's always cared about and worked for the Jewish community and his long history, I can personally attest that that's 100% true.
Ed Israelo, do you want to try to unmute yourself again? Ed, you want to try? Yep. All right. Sorry, we're having technical problems with you. I am going to Sylvia Cohen or Howard. Sylvia? Joy of Zoom, everyone. I apologize. Sylvia, you're unmuted. You're good.
Thank you. This is outside the scope of the pandemic, but on a more macro level, I'm wondering what, if anything, the Wiesenthal Center is doing to support IFA's lawsuit against the neo-Nazis who were responsible for the Charlottesville disaster.
So I'm going to give a very broad stroke answer here because some of my colleagues who are dealing with that would be able to answer that better than I. Obviously we were all horrified by Charlottesville. Even in our quarterly magazine, we made that a highlighted issue. Back, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 issues ago. I'm not the one in the institution who's handling that. So I can't speak to the, I'm happy to, find out the details and get an answer back to the rabbi to get to you if you want. But I haven't been the one taking the lead on that, so I'm not sure. I didn't get the exact update on where we are.
All right, thank you.
So I think we are out of time. Deborah, you want to wrap it up for us?
Sure. There is one Q&A I see posted.
Sorry, yeah, here.
Yeah.
Ed Israel was going to ask the same question that Gary Wolf asked about Mayor de Blasio's comment.
Excellent.
So,
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Well,
sound is not working.
So thank you. First of all, thank you so much to everybody who attended and for all the questions, and to Michael for that really informative presentation. And again, a reminder to anyone who came on late, this was being recorded and the recording will be available on the Temple's website tomorrow. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you for joining us. And be safe and be healthy. And thank you again, Michael.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Good night.
Good night.